Hi there, government students. This is Mr. Vanderzee. Welcome to the internet. If you're watching this, you're probably at home, sitting in your pajamas, in front of your computer, just hanging out, relaxing. Much better than being in your nice, uncomfortable desk in class, or maybe not. I have to warn you, there's currently a fly flying around my room, so I have my fly swatter handy. Just about 5 minutes ago, it landed on my thermos, which I thought was closed. It wasn't. I smacked it with the fly swatter and spilled coffee everywhere. So I'm a little bit upset, but I'm going to do my best here. And if you hear me screaming and slapping in the background, it's because I'm chasing a fly. Without further ado, let's go on to topic 6, the political spectrum. This is our last topic before our test for Unit 1, and it's a pretty important topic because it's really foundational to understanding politics and different political perspectives, as we'll be looking at the different political sides of issues throughout this semester. Letter A, the status quo, is a very important place to start. The status quo means the way things are at this moment, right here, right now, or in politics, the existing political system. The status quo changes with time. It can even change overnight if you have a movement from one government being overthrown to another government, or one person being elected after one leader has been governing for a while. It can change very quickly. When we analyze a person's political beliefs, we always want to start here. What do they think of the status quo? On our spectrum down below, you see the status quo is right here, so keep that in mind. We'll be coming back to that. Now, all 6 of the political perspectives down below are going to differ in these ways. They differ on their attitudes toward changing the existing political system by, first of all, direction. Progressive, are they going towards something new? Or retrogressive, returning to something in the past, the way things used to be. Number 2 is depth. Do they want a minor or major adjustment to society? The greater the adjustment, the further out from the status quo. And so we'll note that on the graph here, or on our spectrum rather. The further people are away from the status quo, the greater the depth of the change they want to see. Number 3, speed. The more upset with the status quo, the more rapid we want change. Okay, so how quickly do you feel change is necessary? Number 4 is method. Should change be made officially or unofficially, legally or illegally, peacefully or violently? Now let's look down at the model below the spectrum. The status quo, we'll circle that because that's again the key, the very important place to start. We either have our direction progressive or retrogressive here, and we're actually going to start pretty near the status quo with conservative. The 2 most common terms you've probably heard are conservative and liberal, probably moderate too. So we'll start with those. If you are conservative, you are most contented with society, active in defending it against challenges to the status quo. Conservatives are pessimistic about human capacity to improve life through the use of reason, and they depend on tried and true institutions. Private property is an inalienable right, and they desire order. So let's break this down a little bit. They're not going to be as upset with the status quo as a liberal. They're more likely to defend the way things are and not want change that is too rapid. They might want some change. You can see they're slightly on the progressive side. They are skeptical of our ability to really improve our own lives through the use of government. They are not going to want to give the government very much power because they feel that it will just be abused and the government can't really do a whole lot to make our lives better. They should rather stay out of our lives and remain very limited in power. A moderate is fairly content with society, supports gradual change, and being a moderate may be a cop-out, but it might be a reasonable perspective. After a lot of research and examination and soul-searching, someone still might come out on an issue in the moderate stance. So it's not always a cop-out. Liberal. A liberal desires rapid, far-reaching change. Liberals believe that people can improve their lives through the use of reason, and a classic liberal believes in natural law. So a classic liberal is more in the sense of just someone who believes in freedom, believing private property was inalienable, believing government oppressed people. And so this is kind of the Enlightenment idea of being a liberal. But nowadays, liberal generally believes private property as a social right, believes government should be used to improve life through social experimentation. In other words, they're willing to give the government a little leeway, a little power to try new things that in the hopes that they can improve life and society. Now let's talk about radical and reactionary. You notice that radical and reactionary are on opposite sides of the status quo, but they do share some things in common. On the liberal side, the progressive side, a radical desires immediate fundamental change. They are frustrated and impatient and revolutionary. Now, a radical might be peaceful or a radical might be violent. A lot of them have been peaceful. I think we can use Martin Luther King Jr. as a clear example of someone who was certainly a radical. He admitted that himself. He broke laws that he felt were unjust, and he was willing to accept the penalties. He was not violent, however. There are lots of violent radicals and people who are willing to try to overthrow the government, willing to break the law, willing to vandalize in order to have their voice heard, maybe even willing to hurt people to have their voice heard and to fight for their change that they feel is necessary. Okay? On the reactionary side, a reactionary is also going to be pretty upset with the status quo, but might want to go back to the way things are. And really, they're fearing a lot of new things and change and wanting to go back to the way things were. But they might be willing to break the law. They might even be willing to get violent. And they certainly often believe that war is an acceptable means to solve problems. Okay? That is going to maybe remind us of groups like the KKK, who do accept violence as a means for change, and are certainly on the retrogressive side of issues, wanting to go back to a day when whites were in charge of society maybe, and minorities did not have very many rights. So certainly retrogressive, and they are definitely a reactionary group. Now let's talk about anarchy. Anarchy is basically the lack of government, lack of law. It's pretty hard for it to exist, and anarchists have a hard time defending their views in society, but there are some out there. So first of all, an individual anarchist. An individual anarchist believes that government prevents the individual from developing himself or herself. This person will believe that government gets in our way, and they would do a fine job of governing themselves, and usually they're going to believe that we are all in conflict with each other and the strong survive. So that idea that government shouldn't get in the way and try to mediate that, the cream will naturally rise to the top, so to speak, and the strong will survive. A social anarchist is going to be a little more maybe peaceful and going to be maybe a little more idealistic about human nature, not believing that we're all in conflict, but believing that, hey, we can all just get along if government would get out of the way. We could govern ourselves and life would be fine. So again, a little idealistic, or maybe very idealistic, and believing that government really gets in our way of making contributions to society, and we could do a fine job of getting along without government. All right. You see on the bottom here the right and left. Those are important terms. When you hear about the right, you're generally thinking more conservative. When you hear about the left, you're thinking more liberal. Okay, so those are political terms you'll also hear. On the left, we generally have more valuing of human rights, rationalism, egalitarianism, which is like equality, personal liberty, and internationalism, maybe a less of a go-it-alone policy and more we need to work with other countries. On the right, They support property rights over human rights, believing that government should respect what we have and never infringe on that. Irrationalism, elitism, so traditionally the elite are more likely to be conservative and preserve the status quo because they have a lot to lose if things change. Authoritarianism and nationalism. So on the right, authoritarianism, you might even, if you go too far to the right, you get to something like Hitler with fascism. And certainly there's a lot of nationalism that went along with Hitler as well, feeling that our country is the best, and we should be dominating others, basically. Okay. All right. Now let's flip over to the back and do some of the practice here. Political spectrum practice. First thing we need to decide here is progressive or retrogressive. All right. So this is just a simple A or B. Basically, we'll do P or R. So, someone who favors the banning of all handguns in the United States. We need to decide if this person is progressive or retrogressive, so we have to think about the status quo, and we have to think about the way things were in the past. Were handguns more permitted in the past, or less permitted in the past? Was there more regulation of weapons, or less regulation? If you thought there was less regulation of handguns in the past, you are correct, and so banning handguns is not going to be going to the past. It's going to be going further towards something new, being less permissive of guns and more regulation. So this person is going to be progressive. That's something new. Number 2, someone who favors allowing states to ban abortions. Okay, you have to think, were abortions more permitted in the past or less permitted in the past? If you thought they were less permitted, you are correct. There may have been less official laws, but certainly it was frowned upon and not a socially acceptable thing. Yes, it may have happened all the time, but it was certainly not socially acceptable. Nowadays, it has become a more socially acceptable option, so going back, allowing states to ban abortions would be kind of like going back to the way things were when abortions were less permitted. Therefore, it is retrogressive. All right, let's do a couple of these down at the bottom now. Number 1. So now we're getting more specific. You still want to think, are they retrogressive or progressive? But we're getting a little more specific. Number 1, the type of anarchist that would be considered a social Darwinist. Every person fend for yourself, only the strong survive. You may remember from the back set or from the front side, I mentioned that with individual anarchist. So this is clearly an individual anarchist, someone who feels that the strong survive and is a little more okay with violence and chaos. Number 2, an anti-smoker who burns down a large cigarette factory to make a point about non-smoking. Alright, we have to once again think, was smoking something that was more permitted in the past or less permitted in the past? If you thought smoking was more permitted in the past, you are correct. It's smoking in elevators, your very own Grand Rapids Christian School, teachers would smoke in the teacher's lounge, happened all the time. And smoking in airplanes, elevators, everywhere. And so now it is much less permitted, and a lot of restrictions on smoking. So someone who is anti-smoker is going to be progressive, going towards something new, because it used to be more permitted. So we know it is going to be progressive, but now to what degree? All right. Yes, arson, burning down a cigarette factory, is a violation of the law. We know that. But I would also argue that it is a violent act. Okay? Arson is a violent act. People can die in fires, right? So, and it's absolute destruction of property, which is generally a violent act. So, this person is clearly a radical. Alright, you can try to do the rest. I recommend 8 and 9. We talked about 8. 9 might be a little tricky. You don't have to worry about that one. Skip it if you want, and then do your best on the rest. You can email me if you have questions. Good luck, and thanks for joining me.